Welcome to the LA Business Podcast, a forum for business owners and senior executives to share the experiences about the elements that drive their success. Your host is Robert Brill, CEO of Brill Media.co, an Inc. 500 company delivering the power of hyperlocal advertising. Robert writes for Forbes, Inc. and ad trade publications. Our goal is to bring you the stories about successes and failures of people who are making big things happen in marketing, entrepreneurship, and management.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 1 of the LA Business Podcast. Today our esteemed guest is Helene Parker. Helene is an 8-year digital advertising expert, currently working at Breakthrough Digital. Helene is also a freelancer, has a podcast called the Programmatic Digest. You can learn more about Helene at her website, which I'll say it phonetically, heleneparker.com, H is silent, or you can go to programmaticdigest.com.
Hey everyone, my name is Helene Parker. I am a senior digital media trader at Breakthrough Digital, but also a programmatic media expert and freelancers. I have my own podcast called the Programmatic Digest podcast. I've been working in this amazing industry for the last 8 years, doing a few things, planning, strategizing, executing, reporting on mixed media campaigns, and working for some badass agencies.
Very cool. Well, Helene, thank you for being here. The reason I want you to be our first guest and why I'm so excited about this is because, I'm doubling and tripling down on podcasting as a value-driven content marketing opportunity. And we'll jump right into it. I guess my question for you is, so 8 years in digital advertising, what are the types of things, what's the type of work that you normally do?
So I'm specialized in programmatic media, but I've done social media. I've done some search engine marketing as well. The type of work that I do is that if there's a client or a partner that is in need of any media strategy, then I'm here to help them come up with things like any parameters that will circle their brand strategy, any budget recommendation, any inventory recommendation, and even like messaging recommendation. Of course, creative is not my expertise, but if you work in paid media, you know that the message is just as important as where the message is being, of course, shared. So my day-to-day looks a little bit like that, monitoring, managing, optimizing campaigns, doing some strategy for client, doing some project management strategy as well for other clients. It's pretty cool because our programmatic media industry is so ever advancing and moving at 1,000, to say the least. So being able to stay educated is definitely number one priorities and should be for everyone almost, in my personal opinion. So training and staying educated, and my best way to do that is through podcasting. So that's why I'm super excited about what you're doing here, being able to just shed some light. And I absolutely agree with you that podcasting is definitely going to be one of maybe close to, I'm going to say, trusted content sharing, because you have that one-on-one, almost like you have that one-on-one communication vehicle. Like is you're basically, that person is by themselves listening to you while driving or walking to the subway or metro, depending on where you're located. So I that's where I am right now, and that's why I absolutely commend what you're doing with this.
Awesome. So Helene, let me ask you a question. Why did you start a podcast? What was the impetus there? I mean, I imagine you're busy. You have a lot of things going on. Like it seems like a real investment in the best possible way. Tell me about your journey on how you got to be the host of a podcast.
So at the beginning of the year, I promised myself to become a true trusted source from my peers, which means being able to not only be an expert, but really being able to be a source of knowledge, a source of, at least if I don't know the answer, here's the best person to. And to be very honest, I've had in my LinkedIn circles, but also in my peers, a lot a lot of them have come to me about, hey, what do you think about this? Have you used this or this person? So I just wanted to channel what I already had and take it to the next level. And also I wanted to challenge myself again into staying on top of the this industry. And the best way for me to do that and to hold myself accountable was to produce content. I'm not a big writer. If you know me personally, you know I like to chat. We just communicate with people. So I
Yeah.
figured, okay, well, I'm not going to do a YouTube channel because that also involves a lot. It's a big investment in times and some investment in money, of course. So I decided to I did some research, and I'm seeing that podcast is actually growing. It's not as popular as we think it is, but it is more popular than it's just crazy. I wish I'll send you some stats on that from eMarketers actually.
Hey everyone, just a brief interlude here. I want to add some color commentary to the conversation about the metrics on podcasting. There are 76 million podcast listeners according to eMarketer. And if you roll up into all digital audio listeners, there's 204 million listeners in the US for any digital audio, music, or podcasting, or any other type of content. And then finally, according to Edison Research, people are spending over 7 hours a week listening to podcast content. All right, back to the show.
But so I just wanted to grow with this whole industry and learn from it. So it took about 6 months to really do some research, really look at competitiveness, like what are my who I consider a competitor actually is doing, how can I do it better. And then to be very honest, the idea really came one day when I was listening to my Alexa. I have her I have her set up every morning to, tell me the verse of the day, a quick proverbs, and then it goes into the weather, and then it goes into a couple news stations local, and then it tells me NPR. But you can set up that routine in the
Mm-hmm.
Alexa. And so I was like, dang, I really wish I had like a podcast to tell me really quick what are the top five highlights of the day in the programmatic world, or even like the digital advertising world. And so that's when I was like, maybe I'll just create that. So that's actually another phase of where I will take my podcast. Right now is only weekly, but that's where how the idea was born, thanks to Alexa. And that's why the podcast is now available on Alexa. You just have to say, Alexa, play Programmatic Digest via TuneIn, and then she'll play it for you.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think Alexa is amazing.
Yes, she's convenient. She is convenient. I don't use her to control anything else in my house. But when it comes to music and news, that's definitely the two things I use Alexa for. And reminders remind me that Zeus is outside, so he doesn't fry in the middle of summer, because I'm not really good at that. So she's been looking out for both of Zeus and myself.
So you saw a need in the marketplace. You said there's really no great way for me to get the top 5 facts on programmatic or digital advertising. You didn't find any podcasts that you found were serving that particular niche, and certainly there are advertising podcasts, but the format, the way you wanted to consume it. So then you did 6 months of research to find out what other content creators in our business are doing, and you formulated a plan of how to of a format to develop. Yes, is that what else did you do? Like, was there anything else that you did? Like, I guess my question really is like, how like what are you learning? What have you found? What unexpected things have you experienced because of this podcast? Like, you have really big guests, like Matt Prohaska. I think Matt Prohaska is amazing, right? Like,
Right.
how do you tell me what you learned during this experience?
So during the research part, I did, a competitive analysis like all us marketers would do for our
Mhm.
clients. So I did that for what I wanted to do. And I'm not saying that the podcast is the only one out there, because there are, like I said, other podcasts that I could consider competitors. Like Behind the Numbers, I think, is a really good one. And I strongly recommend anybody to listen to it because we're only here to learn ultimately. But as I'm doing my research, I'm also training myself on what listeners want to hear, but how they want to hear it. So I train into how to edit a podcast. I tested several software. Of course, I was like on a limited budget, so I did not want to invest a lot. So I started with all the free tools, and so far it's been pretty good with some free tool. Then I had to upgrade to others. So
Like
during
what?
that time,
Can you go into some details of like some of the tools that you liked or didn't like?
okay, so I looked, for instance, for the media host, which is the platform or the software that will host all of your episodes. So I started looking at SoundCloud, which has I can't remember if it had a free trial one, but you have a membership of SoundCloud and you have to pay for. I didn't really like how limited SoundCloud was, but SoundCloud has a large um, already has a large amount of followers. But when I was doing my research, I just could find the same amount of followers, or my audience was so targeted that I could not use SoundCloud basically.
Yep.
So I went with Libsyn instead, and Libsyn was very user friendly. I had to upgrade a couple times to get the storage that I wanted because on episodes are along, whether it's 20 minutes and 40 minutes, it's long and it takes space. So you have to be mindful that you might have to pay for storage, you might have to pay for the media host, but I strongly recommend that you do because Libsyn makes things so easily. The podcast is available everywhere: TuneIn, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. I'm forgetting somebody. And then after 3 or 4 months, you are automatically added to one more. Sorry, I'm drawing
Like
blank here.
Spotify, maybe?
Now Spotify, it was like really easy to add on.
Okay.
I think it was Pandora. I think after a few months, you get added to. Oh no, it's not Pandora. I'm sorry, it's iHeart Radio, I think, or
Oh,
iHeart
cool.
Media. It was one of those three.
So there's a vetting process for some of these
Yeah,
platforms.
some
Yeah.
some of those, yeah, some of those will not add you right away. And iTunes actually was a little. iTunes rejected me a couple times because of. I think in the first couple episodes we said the word like a bad word that
Oh,
us adults
really?
always say. Yeah, so it only rejected me because I said it was, it didn't have any curse word, but you have to check like, oh no, make content may include explicit content. You have to
Yeah, I
check
was
that
gonna
box.
say, because Gary Vaynerchuk, boy, he curses up a storm, and
As
he's
long
on.
as he checked that box, he's fine. As long as he checked that box, he's fine. So I learned the hard way, but luckily, that's why I did the very, very, very first episode was just an intro. It was like 9 minutes, just me explaining and testing the microphones and all.
Yeah.
So because I wanted to test out the media host, I wanted to make sure that everything looked good. So those are just like the trials. And I think the first 5 episodes are not my proudest because of the sound quality. Also because in the first 3 to 4 episodes, I was still figuring out the format. Although I had like a solid format, it just didn't match my professional life. It was just getting too much. So at the same time, I was like, I'm going to keep enjoying this because I do. And I
Right.
don't want it to be a burden. I don't want it to be something like, oh, snap, I have to do it. So that's why I kept reformatting. And actually, that's why I took a little pause because I'm reformatting things right now. I'm actually trying to figure out like a more diverse guest book. So, so some of the other things I would recommend investing is a good microphone.
Yeah.
I use the Audio Technica ATR 2100, um, and I have it all set up. And as a fellow podcast listener, I don't care who is on the podcast. If the quality of the sound is not there, I am the worst listener. I shut it down. I can't find patience and understanding to finish the audio, the episode itself. So the audio quality was definitely number one. And if you go back to episode 1 and 2, it wasn't there yet because I was still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, look,
So
that's okay. It's
right.
interesting. It's interesting, Ellen, because I actually started a podcast in late 2017 called Learn
Wow.
from Entrepreneurs. And like I recorded 3 episodes and did nothing with it. And I found out there's a term for that. called like what's it called, pod fader or something, pod
Oh,
fade.
I came across that term, yeah, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, pod fader.
Yeah, so warning to everyone listening. I've been The warning is I've done this before and didn't continue it. The benefit is now we're on round two and I'm much more sort of like organized around this. And I think you're absolutely right. It has to be fun and interesting for
Yeah,
me to want to continue it.
and you bring an excellent point. It has to be, it has to be organized. Like I prepare every single episode. I literally have a drive just dedicated to the podcast. Whenever I come up with like content or like an article, because my podcast is article based, I'll ping it or I'll come back or I'll try to look in LinkedIn like who is the expert that can speak on that. The reality, the not so fun reality, I guess, is that if your podcast is guest like mine, like guest based and interview based like mine, even though it's just talking about the article and talking about the industry, like in the last 4 weeks I've had guests drop because it's Q4 and I've been busy too anyway.
Yeah,
So it's just a bad reality that I'm going through, like, oh snap, maybe I should have started pre-recording early this summer to prepare for Q4. So that's something we want to remember. And also, since my podcast is article based, I did never want it to record too early, but now I'm just realizing like I am going to start recording at least 4 to 5 episodes in advance so that I don't have a break, because consistency is everything. And
sure.
depending on your media host, or depending on, I can actually look them up, and whoever is helping you with your analytics part, you want to make sure to track those numbers. And just that's just a marketer in me and you, right? You're going to make sure that
Yeah.
people are listening. And I see considerate a drop in listens when I take a week break. I also see a big peak when I use promotional content, whether it's like on Instagram, even. Like I never thought about Instagram being like a B2B programmatic focus
Yeah.
content, but you'll be surprised. There's a lot of people out there, and it makes sense. Our generation, we're using social media to connect. So why not just hit them there and just remind them like, hey, on your time, on your break, just listen to the podcast. So there's all of that. It's not only about recording, editing, scheduling a guest, it's also thinking about the promotion of the content, because it's not organic unless you have that following behind you already. Um, so like a celebrity that's starting their own podcast, they already have so many followers and fans. So for somebody like myself who's just a freelancer in North Carolina, Raleigh, I have to create that following. And I'm okay with taking the time to, because I want to make sure that I'm doing it the smart way and taking risks where it makes sense.
So here, it's interesting, right? Like I had a job at an agency called Eisenberg Group, and one of the interesting things I learned is that there's no such thing as viral. What
Yes,
viral is taking a piece of content and marketing the heck out of it with all the tools and communication tools of our time.
absolutely.
What, I've seen you on Instagram stories. What are the top three-ish channels that you use to draw out listeners and generate interest and discovery around the podcast?
I think the best channel right now is the guest followers and mine. So word of mouth works best. I try to share the content with every single guest so that they can share it on their end. And if they want to repurpose and share it like 2-3 months later, they can also do so. The second thing would be, it really depends on your podcast listeners. Don't start a podcast without knowing who you want to talk to. I knew exactly why I started a podcast. I wanted to speak to everybody that works in my field, but not only the CEOs, the top, the decision makers, but people in the backline. I like to call us minions, programmatic ninjas, that are actually going in the platform every day, making some of those changes. But at the same time, I want it to be relevant enough that if a client is working with an agency and the agency is not performing, then they know what type of question to ask. So
Yeah.
my followers and listeners are very B2B, and they have to have some type of knowledge about the programmatic media world. So again, if it's an agency that's that just started, or If it's just a mom and pop's shop, that might not be my listener. But if it's like a programmatic buyer, if it's even anybody in sales and digital media sales, social media sales, anything that sort, I think it hits one of the episode may be relevant to them at least. So while
Yeah.
doing some research, again, I came across LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a great for a podcast like myself. And then again, I discovered that Instagram had some type of following there. So that's why I wanted to test the waters there. And then I have like a Facebook attached to it, but I'm not as involved on Facebook yet because I don't see Facebook as that channel yet. And maybe I'm not understanding it just yet.
Yeah.
Um, and I did not want to have something on every single social media. So I already have a Twitter, so I didn't change my Twitter to call it Programmatic Digest. I just kept it as mine, and I'm promoting my as a host on Twitter, and on Instagram, the Programmatic Digest podcast is promoting. So that's the
So
difference.
so that's interesting, right? Like, do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
I absolutely consider myself an entrepreneur. I've started, tested so many things, and I definitely have that fire in me. Now, if if it really depends what type of entrepreneur, I'm sure that you can segment them out there. I don't know which one I am, but I definitely think that in the next 5 years, I not only will be working for myself, but I will have created some type of educational platform for the new programmatic ninjas, because we are realizing in our industry that there's a scarcity of talent out there, and agencies, or and I'm not generalizing, of course, some agencies are not willing to provide the full training needed to those. And so now now we're trying to hire. It's really hard to hire for that talent. That's why you're seeing a lot of like the We Are Rosie or the work reduce come popping up, because they are able to fill in the blanks and not bring that headache to an agency, going having to like hire a brand new person and train them. So
Oh
I
yeah.
have a couple plans, and my intention is definitely educational. That's why I figured, okay, let me start with a podcast and see what's out there and optimize based on the listeners, but based on the need of the industry, because that's definitely needed.
So
It's
you're
tough.
you're thinking about training. So
Yeah, education for
are
sure.
you that's really so I'll connect you with someone who I know that has also a vision similar to what I mean, I don't know what your vision is, right? Because you're giving me very top level, and I don't want to like to get into the details. You may not be ready for that, and I don't want to put you on the spot. But what I'll tell you is that there's someone else who I know who also has a similar type of vision. And I
Mhm.
think it'd be interesting for you to connect. And what's interesting to me, let me ask you this. What do you expect to get out of being a podcast host? Like, what do you think is going to happen? What do you
Definitely
hope
make
happens?
more connection and learn from others. I've only worked in the industry for 8 years, and I thought I knew some things, and some guests have reminded me that no, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm still thinking one way. Maybe I'm being biases even in the way I'm thinking at work, or in the way I'm thinking in the way I optimize. So definitely the knowledge from others, and honestly, that's the best way to learn, right? I mean, just learning from others, from their experience. Actually, I did this and it didn't work, but when I did this, it did work. And so that's the number one thing why I wanted to start the podcast, and why I'm trying to stay accountable for being, I'm not gonna say being the best, because that sounds really selfish, but being being smart enough that you know your shit basically.
There you go.
Yes,
NSFW.
exactly. So and
Okay.
then I mean, you mentioned Matt Prohaska. I mean, I've had Matt Prohaska. I have a bunch of really cool people. I had you on my show. I
Yeah.
had Frost Prelude from Simplify. I had some couple people from Omnicom. I mean, it's been really great just talking to those individuals, and some of them have remained very good friends, and I've never met them, you included. So it's definitely just connecting me with a different type of people. And in my podcast, I have a segment only for diversity because I do think that's something and we need to talk about a little bit more and get uncomfortable just hearing the other side. So that's been really great understanding like that side from the
So,
guest.
so before we talk about diversity, like, and I want to wrap this up but there's two questions here. Number
Mhm.
one, so you and I were connected, but we didn't know each other. But now you
Okay.
are, what I think is interesting about this is you are tip top on the name list for when people are asking me like, who do I know that might be interested in stuff. And
Mhm.
I'm also talking about you on Reddit because I think and like from a value driven content marketing perspective, you are absolutely executing on that strategy, and I think it's fantastic, right? Like I think you are, like, I'm really interested to see what the next year looks like for you and for me because I'm also activating on this strategy. Did you know Matt Prohaska or Frost Prelu prior to doing the podcast?
Thank you for the feedback. That's very encouraging and well needed by now. And no, I did not know Matt Prohaska. I started following him on LinkedIn maybe a year ago, and I really liked the type of content he was producing on LinkedIn. So reached out to him. Took a couple months to book him. Same thing with Frost Prelude. Took a couple months to book him. But I've used Simplify as a platform. So I went through my connection at Simplify, for instance, to get to Frost. Some of the ad techs like Simplify and the Trade Desk, they will not like only you can only interview maybe the PR person or a higher up in marketing. So
Sure.
that's why I went straight to Frost Pirlu, and he was so cool, really encouraging.
Hmm.
But other because my intention was to again interview somebody that did everything in the back end.
Yep.
So some of those act techs that's not possible, and that's very much understandable because they want to control the type of information that's out there. That's definitely something I advise everybody because things can be twisted in so many ways. So yeah, I did not know them personally, just professionally via LinkedIn or via, like I said, a connection.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think, the purpose of this podcast is really there's two top line things that we're doing. Number one, I have heard this really interesting talk from Ty Lopez. And Ty Lopez, he's an entrepreneur, he's an internet personality. I think he's like technically a genius, like the numbers identify him as a genius. And I saw him speak. And what was interesting is that he has a rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds
Hmm.
is spend one third of your time with people who are above you, so have more knowledge and are doing very different things, bigger things than you. Spend
Hmm.
one third of your time doing things with your peers, coworkers, friends, anyone who you're social and friendly with, those are your peers. And then spend one third of your time with people below you, which are people who need the knowledge that you have.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so the goal here is for this podcast is selfishly, I want to spend time with people who are doing big things in business. And I want to activate on that content driven, the value driven content strategy of be the source of knowledge so that other business owners can have access and knowledge to what big business people are doing. And I think the next year for you is going to be super interesting because I just think you're going to blow up in the best possible way because you're going to get all kinds of notoriety just because you're doing the podcast. And by the way, I'm still trying to sponsor your podcast. So,
I know. Yeah, and to be very honest, that's the goal. I gave myself about a year. Actually, I gave myself about 6 months before finding a new sponsor, and 2 months and a half in, you came in, and I was like, wait, I'm not ready, but I'm gonna make it work. So that's that's a
yeah,
side conversation between you and me, of course. But
absolutely.
it's scary because in the first month, I did not expect the podcast to do so well, and we're barely reaching 1,000 listeners a month in the first month, and then And then the second month, which we are averaging, I can't remember now. So it's been nicely increasing month over month. And I've only been, like I said, I've only been live for about 3 months now, and took about 3 weeks off. So yeah, it's been scary how fast. And that's another thing too. If you want to start a podcast, make sure you're prepared, and make sure you're consistent. I'm learning the hard way right now, because of how fast it grew. I actually was not even prepared for unforeseen events, such as, oh, our guest is too busy, or you're busy, and because you still have your 9 to 5, you still have a project
Sure.
you're doing, you're still in school even. So yeah, it's been very, very much fun. But right now I'm like, now it's time to take it to the next level. Now it's time to actually, really dedicate a little bit more time, because it takes a lot of time. Like, I edit and produce the podcast. That takes a few hours a week. Just uh I'm not gonna say hunting, but just looking for guests takes another couple hours. And I try to time myself. I'm like, I'm not gonna spend more than like an hour today on LinkedIn just looking at guests, and then doing more research on them, and then emailing them to see if they're interested. And
So what are
10%, 20% say yes, and only 10% have booked so far. So
Yeah. What are give me, so I want to ask you three more questions.
sure.
One about the podcast, one about diversity, and one other thing. So give me some rapid fire tips for B2B business owners like myself, or senior executives who want to build their business through the use of podcasts. Like, what are the top two or three things rapid fire that we should do? One of them I think was consistency. Like, just what comes to mind there?
Um, so consistency and the quality of the content, I think for somebody like you will be very important to use. I will follow up with that, because I can't remember the name of the podcast, but I know there's an agency out there that it's a social media agency, and they have weekly podcasts. But on their weekly podcast, they cover, like, this is the latest Facebook update. This is a campaign we've been running. This is what we did. So giving those type of tips and advice, you might be giving out something important, but at the same time it just shows you have integrity, and then you're doing the work really to help the people, and but also attract potential clients, and that also attract trusted potential clients, in my opinion. So the content, the quality of the content, the consistency of how the content is being produced and deployed. And then I will say the third thing would be, I guess, the promotion of that content, because again, like we mentioned, you you will have to have a system in place that will you not only promote the new comment upcoming content, but old content that been, I'm not gonna say old, but previous content that been published, because that content is still very important, in my opinion. Like, the first episodes, even though the quality of the sounds is not there, I still think that the value of what those guests have shared is so important. So going back and using what somebody has says as content promotion, as like, even like in a media plan, like, oh, this is what people are saying, this is what we've been doing, and it's been successful.
Awesome. So let's switch gears on diversity for a moment. Can you give me a point of view on, I mean, like, what you're passionate about highlighting diversity in our business? Where does that come from, and why, for people who, are, for people who are a bunch of white dudes in advertising, like myself, and I think it is important and I value it, but I want to hear, like, what is your point of view on that, and why is it important?
I think it's basically because of my experience with for working for agencies. I've been the only Black girl for numbers of those agencies, and I've always asked myself, like, why? Like, it's not like there's not people out there. I think that's a deeper conversation, of course, but that's one of the reasons why I want to highlight diversity, because it's not always, it's one of those conversations like, oh yeah, we do need it, but it's more than that. Is getting uncomfortable with the conversation, is also being able to respect somebody's views without allowing your personal biases to take over. And unfortunately, we all have biases. I have biases, racial biases, lifestyle biases, status biases, all of the above, gender biases. So we all have those biases. And dang, we spend time a lot together at work. So how can we not, how can we refrain from those biases? And so it's just educating people about how to really handle situation where somebody does not understand where they're coming from. And to be honest, the most diverse team, the most open teams have been the most successful. It's in stats, like 86% of teams that have diverse team members, and it's diverse not only racial but gender, financial, generational diversity, have been the most successful or more likely to be successful or have had more successful project completed versus a non-diverse team. So, and then you mentioned on the show how one of your team player just had Persian feedback, for instance, or
Yeah.
it was a yeah. So one of
So
those feedback, and it helped.
yeah, I mean the story that I tell repeatedly, I feel like I'm promoting. So there's two circumstances. The one that I think is very interesting to me. So, I grew up in a very diverse background. I grew up in Glendale, California, and there were a lot of Middle Eastern, Persian folks. LA has a great Mexican population, and Southern and Central American population. So like I didn't realize how undiversified a lot of the country is after like going to
Yes.
different places. I'm like, oh man. And I what the funny part is, I consume diversity via food. Like I didn't
Hmm.
realize how boring food is when you're not eating like ramen or some really great Mexican food or like
Yeah.
Middle Eastern food. I'm just a foodie. But the person who I think is the hardest person that the hardest diversity lesson that I've had to learn is actually not about one of the protected classes. It's about emotional IQ and
Yeah.
empathy. And this is something that I said on the show with you is I've had to learn how to find someone who it has incredibly high emotional IQ, because that person, Tony Price, who I've known for
Mhm.
20 years, we went to school together. This is now the third time I've hired him, and we're close friends. And he's the person who has the diversity in the ability to be empathetic with a team,
Mhm.
and that gets the most out of the team. I was on a conversation today, and the person I spoke to was like, yeah, CEOs aren't great managers. And I can say hallelujah to that. Holy freaking cow. I'm not a great manager in a lot
Mhm.
of respects, but I know how to build a business. And this person, Tony Price, who I admire incredibly much, just is the person who has brought some balance to the team in the best possible way.
Right, right. And I agree. And that says a lot about yourself, being able to recognize that, yeah, I'm not good at this, but I know somebody that is, and I'm going to make sure he helps us as well. And that's what that's what like that's the beauty of diversity, being able to recognize people's strength and not so strengths and weaknesses and work with those.
Yeah.
And sometimes having a diverse team help with understanding and being empathetic. And that goes with what I was saying, not allowing those biases to make the best of the conversation, reminding everyone that we need to be productive. Therefore, let's just highlight this, boom, boom, boom. But also having somebody diverse on your team can avoid a lot of like missteps in terms of like on in the advertising world. I mean, I won't mention, but there's our big brands that have had faux pas because they didn't have somebody on their team that probably reflected that culture. And
Yeah.
so that is a big problem. I mean, as a consumer, I'm tired of the big brands just apologizing. Oh, yeah, we did messed up. My bad. No, 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 no. Take accountability. Like, what are you really doing in the back end to make sure you're not going to do this again? Let's not just hire an urban VP or something. Yes, that's a good step in my opinion. But like, what else are you doing? Like, is that team actually a little bit more diverse? Are you training that team to really understand differences in cultures, generational differences, things like that. So that's why I think diversity, the conversation of diversity, is very important. And I am happy to have uncomfortable conversation with people that I deem to be diversity uh, IQ'd lower than
Low
average.
diversity IQ.
I'm happy to have this conversation, and I'm not rude, I'm not disrespectful, I'm not condescending at all, because my goal is to make sure you will take back something that's going to make your brain work a little harder next time you hear it, or next time you see it, or when you're thinking about our conversation.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but there's a way to have it, that conversation, and some of them are not happy, some of them are not always diplomatic, but at the end of the day, if we can agree on a couple things, then good, we won, right? If you're a
Absolutely.
manager out there and you recognize like, I'm not a people's person, but I know somebody there is, good. When you're hiring that person, let's make sure they are really open-minded. That's so important. I mean, I've met a couple of my own managers, like, not open-minded at all, and it was obviously like gender related too, and it was like a blind person could see it, so
Well,
it has to be in conversation.
so what's interesting to me about that, and we'll wrap it up shortly. What I think
Of
is
course.
interesting is just from a very basic level, like we know one of the basic principles of advertising is show your consumer consuming the thing, consuming your product.
Yeah.
Like it's very simple. And we all know we live in a diverse country. Like you can't deny that.
Yeah.
It's like so hard for me to see like ads that don't actually reflect
Reflect.
just the models. The people in the ads need to look like the people who you want to consume the product, yo. Like it's very simple.
Yeah. It's as simple, but to some people it's just a different language, and that's the part that we all have to recognize. And I do think that and I hate to bring it up, but I do think that the younger generation is doing a little bit better in having those conversations and actually taking actions against some of those diversity biases.
Yeah.
So I don't think the previous generation did well, but I also don't think that they didn't know better. And the way things are working in the advertising world, it's just affected by some way in our consuming, and as a consumer, it's also affected by our personal life. It's also affected by everything around us. I mean, social justice, the environment. You just mentioned our country politically. Things are affecting the way we do work, and that's just natural. And there's like a scientific study on that. Actually, I came across it, it was pretty cool. It was an old study though, it was back from 2015, but it just showed that, like, yeah, I mean, you can't be the best person if you're not willing to educate yourself on your personal life. And
Yep.
that means improving your circles, not that your circle is not where it needs to be, but really improving it in a way that maybe talking to
Diversify.
somebody, yeah,
It's
diversifying,
like
talk to
simple.
somebody.
Be
Yeah,
open.
so, exactly. Talk to somebody you're not used to talking. Talk to somebody on the bus. Talk to somebody
Yeah.
on the street, and try to remove the way they look. Just see them as an individual
Yeah.
versus this person.
As a yeah versus a member of the group.
Yeah.
So Ellen, uh as we wrap up here, I want to ask you, tell me something interesting about yourself that maybe people don't know, which I'm pretty sure that's the same question you ask on your podcast. So
I love that question
I'm
though.
borrowing that. And then number two, because I'm a foodie and I love really interesting foods or good foods or whatever, like what's the first thing that comes to mind when I ask you, like, what do you love to eat? Like, what would you eat all day, every day if you could?
Okay, so the first question was like an interesting thing about myself.
Yeah.
So I am bilingual. French is my first language because I was born and raised in Senegal, which is a West African country. So the first official language there is, the official language there is French, but I also understand two other, the Senegalese dialect, one of them, which is called Wolof, and it's
Oh.
Arabic based a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And then I also understand Cape Verdean Creole because my origins are from a Portuguese island also located in West Africa called Cape Verde. So I don't know how to write those languages, and I can guess how to read it sometimes, but that would be the fun fact, the fact that I'm bilingual and able to understand and speak two other language. I don't think
So
I'm.
So wait. So did you say Cape Verdean Creole?
Yes, they speak a Portuguese Creole there.
And what was the other language? Senegalese?
So Senegal has a few dialect and ethnicity within the country, and the most spoken is Wolof, which is
Wolof.
Wolof. Yes.
Can you say something in both of those languages?
It sounds very Arabic. So if you have to greet yourself, you'll say Salam alaikum.
Okay.
So it sounds like Arabic. Jërëjëf, which is thank you. So Nangadef, which is how are you doing? So that's really Wolof. I don't think Arabic people say Nangadef. But that's like the difference of that.
Wow, that's amazing. Are there what type of food you like? Like, what's your favorite thing?
I'm a big foodie too. Can probably eat about everything. So if something I can eat every day though is any dish from Senegal or any dish from Cape Verde. Senegalese dish that is really popular is called cheboujen, which is a fish-based tomato rice and some vegetable. And we usually eat it around the bowl, like a family bowl. So we all eat together. And Cape Verdean wise, there's a really popular dish called, the main dish is called cachup, which is, I like to describe it as like a corn-based chili, but it's definitely not like chili because it has pork, it has yuca, and it's like mainly, it has beans, but it's mainly corn. So it looks a little bit like, the consistency looks like a little bit like chili, and some people eat it with rice, but I call them like, cachup shouldn't be eating with rice, so that's like fake people. Like my sisters eat it with rice. I don't understand them. They're not normal. They're fake Cape Verdean. So you're not supposed to, I don't think you're supposed to eat it with rice. So watch all the Cape Verdean on your show. Your listeners will like email me like, actually, honey.
That sounds great. I'm on a keto diet and that all sounds delicious.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Keto. That's not keto friendly at all. Like rice and beans are not keto friendly. Yeah. So
Helene, as we wrap this up, tell the listeners where they can find you if they want to reach out more.
Sure. So I have a website. I actually like the way you introduced it earlier. Phonetically, it's heleneparker.com, which is HELENE Parker, PARKER.com. You can also find me on the programmaticdigest.com podcast. It's spelled as it sounds, programmatic, 2 M's. You can find the podcast anywhere on iTunes, Spotify. You can find, if you go onto my website, you'll probably find everything from like my social media, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Honestly, you can email me, call me if you need to. That would be the best way to reach out to me. But I'm also very responsive on social media, so that's a good way to get to me too.
Awesome. Thank you, Helene. I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to your journey and to see where you are a year from now. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Likewise.